Ci troviamo adesso
We
nella
are now in
preparazione della
the
linea.
preparation of the line of our next dessert, Creme Caramel, a product that we necessarily have to cook before and then serve. It is served directly out of the fridge, and then we're going to just let it heat up at room temperature, but not too much of it, otherwise it would lose structure. We're starting from a crème anglaise base, and it will finish directly in the oven at 150 degrees for 50 minutes or 1 hour with some water that will allow to create a little part of steam inside, so we can also cook it directly in the oven without water with the lid on. We prefer to do this type of cooking always with a lid on. We're going to use some small ramekins, ceramic ramekins. You can also use some aluminum molds. And at the base we will add caramel. So let's start with cooking the sugar. Low heat. Don't start with high heat to avoid to prevent it from burning. We'll put it as a base to then put the crème anglaise. So we're going to place our ramekins here, so we don't have to grease them. We're going to place our water around 1/3 of the way of the volume we have in our ramekins. If you're afraid that they move a little bit during the cooking, you can place a small piece of carton underneath the ramekins to avoid that they move during the baking. So as we wait for the caramel to make, remember that when you have to make more, avoid to put too much, so always have a little bit of sugar. As it melts, put some more sugar, or just simply take a casserole that's slightly bigger than this. You can see as the borders start burning, just lift it. We have to try not to overpower the heat. We can lower the heat and work more on the central part. Avoid to stir, because if air starts coming in, it might favor the recrystallization of the sugar. So I always advise you to do this type of thing, stirring it with the casserole movement. And by doing this, we're better distributing our sugar. In the meantime, we're going to put casserole in our cooking point. We're going to add milk. We're going to make crème anglaise base. I advise you not to add too many aromatic parts, maybe some orange or lemon zest, but we're trying to have a base that is as neutral as possible. So slowly, so that we have a nice bronzing and a uniform melting, and we will prevent it from burning. Then let's start adding the sugar in the egg yolk, just a small part, and another part directly in the milk. Always check the external boiling. When you notice that the sugar has completely melted, you can turn the heat off. Anyways, the caramel holds the temperature quite well. It is completely melted. Turn the heat off to keep the heating phase. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move it because it's ready. Be careful about the smoke that comes out of it because they're very high temperature. So be careful. I'm starting to heat up our milk, placing the caramel at the bottom of our ramekins. If it's the first time you do it, avoid doing it on top of the water. Maybe only put the water later. Remember to have a ramekin that is completely dry. Now, when the caramel has cooled, we will go on with the crème anglaise. Never put the crème anglaise, the base, on top of the caramel that's still very warm. We would have the crème anglaise might melt it, and we wouldn't have a layer anymore. The caramel that's left over can be used for decorations, or we can put some cream, warm cream, in it to make a mousse sauce. Clearly, since we have cold water here, it's going to cool down more quickly. Let's heat up the milk, eventually with the aromas. I'm going to whisk the egg yolk with the sugar. Always keep the milk under control. We don't need for it to boil. Lowering with the heat, we're just letting it work in the central part because it has already heated in the border at the perimeter. So let's keep stirring. When the sugar will be nice and melted, we can start mixing the milk in the bowl and then directly put it in our ramekins. We can put everything in a glass to be a little bit more tidy when we assemble everything. Okay, let's remove our whisk. Let's take a spatula and we're going to pour the milk inside like this. Stir gently. I always advise you to let the crème anglaise a little bit to be completely sure that it doesn't melt the caramel. It has cooled down enough. So when we have thoroughly mixed the two components, what we're going to do is I always advise you to put the mixture in a glass just like this, diagonally, so that we don't incorporate too much air. And we're going to wait for the air from the bottom goes towards the surface and completely disappears to have a structure of the Creme Caramel that's as uniform as possible. So around 1 minute, 1 minute and a half, and you'll be able to pour it. Or if you need to hurry up, we're going to remove a bit of the bubbles so that we can hurry up. And now we're going to dress our base. So as close as possible, as near as possible, almost to the top of our ramekin, it will tend to shrink a little bit. So we have around 4 with our dosage. What we're going to do now is cover them like this, and we're going to go at 150 degrees for 50 minutes or 1 hour. Remember, after the cooking, remove from the tray with the water, blast chill it positive until it cools down, and then you can serve them either directly in the ramekin, or you can unmold it and serve on a dish. Now we're going to prepare another base we will use for our creme caramel. We're going to make an orange sauce. So we're going to plate up our dessert, so we will need a nice sauce. We want to give some freshness to our creme caramel. So orange juice, we're going to add the sugar. Clearly the quantity of sugar is proportional to how ripe the orange is, to its quality. So we're going to heat it up slightly, without boiling, not to lose the main aromas and nutritional values that we have in orange. So it's always better to work under the boiling point, around 70 degrees. In the meantime, we're going to hydrate our gelatin. Remember that in this case we're using it to have a slight density to our sauce. We advise to use fish glue because it tends to work under 60 degrees. Maybe using another type of thickener or gelatin, we should get to higher temperature and we might ruin the organoleptic perception of our sauce. When the sugar has completely melted, we're going to melt it back in the bowl, and we will add our fish glue under, so within 60 degrees. And so once we let it cool off, we're going to put it in a squeezer or in a container, and we will decide to use it, dressing it on top of the dish. It is always served cold, of course. You can also put some aromas, some aromatic herbs like marjoram, thyme, to give it a flavor impact that's a little bit more surprising. So we're lowering the heat because it's starting to boil in some areas. So the sugar is completely melted. Clearly that with the heat that we already have, we can there's one part of the sugar that hasn't melted yet, but the base is warm enough. So what we're doing is stirring, rotating like this, then pouring in our bowl, and then scraping some sugar that remained. With the heat we have, the sugar will completely melt, so we don't need to get to determined temperatures. Now we're going to take our fish glue, rinse it, we're going to insert it inside, and we're going to gently stir. It will melt very easily. Clearly, after we put it in a bowl and started stirring, we have a nice temperature fall. Now, when stirring with the spatula, we don't perceive the grains of sugar anymore. We can cool it off. I advise you in this phase to cool it off with a cold water bath, stirring to avoid that the Gelatin can clump up in some points, so keep stirring, cooling it off, avoiding to blast chill it. Then you're going to preserve it in a cover container or a vacuum bag. And our orange sauce is ready. If you want, you can add some candied orange to give it a more pleasant chewing experience, or you can leave it like this.